White woman steals, black CEO's seat, then learns. He owns the entire airline. The cabin of the aircraft was meant to be quiet, but a sharp voice cut through the air like glass shattering. "Excuse me, this is my seat," Victoria Hargrove declared, her tone dripping with indignation. Heads turned instantly. Passengers froze with half-buckled belts and unopened magazines, all pretending not to stare while listening closely. The young flight attendant shifted nervously, glancing at the boarding passes in her hand, caught in the storm of Victoria's glare. Across from her sat a man who had not moved since she began. Daniel Whitmore looked up slowly, his eyes calm, his posture relaxed, as if he had faced scenes like this 100 times before. His silence seemed to irritate her more than any word could have. "You heard me," she pressed louder now. "This isn't coach. This is first class. You don't belong here." The murmur of the cabin rose like a whispering tide. People craned their necks, eager to catch the confrontation without being obvious. Phones slid quietly out of pockets. A recording would be worth showing friends later. Daniel shifted the notebook resting on his lap, but his voice remained steady, almost gentle. "I am sitting where I am supposed to sit," he said. Nothing more. Victoria scoffed, tossing her expensive handbag onto the empty seat beside her. "Please, I know your type. You sneak into places you don't deserve and you expect people like me not to notice. Well, I notice." A middle-aged man 2 rows back coughed into his fist, trying to disguise a chuckle. The tension was starting to feel like theater, except no one knew the script yet. The flight attendant opened her mouth to intervene, but Daniel raised a hand lightly, stopping her. His calmness only seemed to fuel Victoria's fury. Her cheeks flushed and her voice sharpened further. "Answer me! Who exactly do you think you are?" Daniel's eyes lingered on her for a long second before he looked back down at his notebook, pen moving across the page without hurry. It was as though her words did not matter at all. That single act, ignoring her in favor of a few quiet notes, shifted the atmosphere entirely. Passengers leaned forward, their curiosity now a grip that would not loosen. The question was no longer whether Daniel belonged in the seat. It was something deeper, something more thrilling, because the truth was hanging in the air, waiting to drop. Victoria had chosen the wrong target, and she had no idea who she was speaking to. Daniel Whitmore never looked like a man who needed attention. His suit was modest, dark navy with no designer label visible. The watch on his wrist was functional, not flashy. To a stranger passing by, he was another quiet professional on a flight, keeping to himself, jotting ideas in a worn leather notebook. Appearances, however, are never the full story. Daniel had boarded this plane with purpose. He was flying to Dallas for a meeting that could shape the future of the airline industry, yet no one looking at him would have guessed the weight of his schedule. He had no entourage, no assistant fussing over his bag. He carried his own briefcase, nodded politely to the crew, and settled into his seat as if it were any other day. The truth was different. Daniel was the youngest CEO to ever lead a major regional airline. His company had grown rapidly under his leadership, taking bold risks while others hesitated. Yet he never carried himself with the arrogance people expected from someone in power. He preferred listening over talking, writing down thoughts instead of announcing them. In boardrooms, he let others speak first, only stepping in when his words could shift the direction of an entire discussion. That restraint had earned him as much respect as his success. Victoria Hargrove was his opposite in every way. Where Daniel moved quietly, she filled every space with her presence. She had built her life around image, crafting an identity that screamed wealth even when her bank account wavered. Her clothes sparkled with logos, her nails were polished to perfection, and her social media was a steady stream of staged photographs meant to impress people she barely knew. What she lacked in humility, she made up for in volume. On the ground, Victoria was known in her circles as someone who climbed ladders, not by hard work, but by dismissing anyone below her. Waiters, receptionists, flight attendants, she treated them as background scenery. To her, worth was measured by appearance, by where you sat, by how loudly you declared your superiority. And so when she saw Daniel already seated in first class, her instincts took over. She did not pause to consider that he might belong there. She did not wonder if perhaps he had earned that seat. All she saw was a man who, in her mind, did not fit the image she had decided belonged in row 2. Daniel had encountered people like her before. People who mistook quiet for weakness, simplicity for lack of success. Years of experience had taught him to let arrogance reveal itself without his help. Yet this confrontation had drawn more eyes than usual. He could feel the weight of dozens of passengers staring, waiting, hungry to see how the scene would unfold. It was not the first time Daniel had been underestimated. As a teenager, he had worked nights at a small airport cleaning planes. Colleagues twice his age laughed when he talked about designing new systems for efficiency. "Stick to the mop," one man had told him. But Daniel kept his head down, studied at night, and used his paychecks to fund classes in aviation management. Even later, when he first entered the corporate side of the industry, older executives dismissed him as the kid. He was not invited into backroom deals. He was not trusted with major decisions at first. But he never snapped back. He let results speak for him. When his projections saved a struggling airline division millions, those same executives were forced to acknowledge him. Slowly, the laughter turned into respect. That history was why he could face Victoria now with such steady composure. She saw only what she wanted to see, a man out of place. He knew what she could not yet imagine, that every assumption she made was about to collapse in front of her audience. Victoria, meanwhile, thrived on these little performances. She lived for moments when others shrank back under her voice. She wanted passengers to look at her and silently confirm that she was right. To her, Daniel's calmness was not strength, it was weakness. His silence only convinced her that she had won. She was wrong. Every second she raised her voice, the line between arrogance and dignity grew sharper. The passengers noticed it even if she did not. Whispers carried through the cabin. Why is she so insistent? Why is he so calm? Open phones hovered just above. Tray tables, red recording dots glowing faintly. The story was being captured in real time, though Victoria had no idea how far it would travel once the plane landed. Daniel, however, felt the tension like a weight pressing on the cabin air. He was not a man eager for confrontation, but he understood its power. His restraint was not born of fear, it was strategy. He knew that arrogance eventually collapses under its own weight. All he had to do was let Victoria keep talking. And she would. Because pride like hers never knew when to stop. The silence that followed Daniel's quiet reply lasted only seconds, but in Victoria's world it felt unbearable. She leaned forward, her bracelets clinking as her hand gripped the armrest. Her voice rose above the soft hum of the engines. "You do not belong here," she snapped, her words sharp enough to turn heads 3 rows back. "This is first class. People like you should know your place." Passengers stiffened in their seats. The choice of words was deliberate, cruel, and loud enough for the entire cabin to hear. A man in business attire lowered his newspaper slowly, eyebrows raised. A young woman across the aisle nudged her friend, whispering, "Is she serious?" Phones began to appear one by one. Screens glowed faintly as passengers pretended to scroll, while the red recording dots blinked. No one wanted to miss what was unfolding. The flight attendant nearest to them took a cautious step forward. "Ma'am," she said softly, "please lower your voice. We are about to depart, and we need everyone to remain calm." Victoria ignored her. Her eyes stayed fixed on Daniel, who had yet to raise his own voice. The stillness in his expression unsettled her, though she did not show it. She doubled down. "I have traveled enough to know who belongs in this cabin," she continued, her tone dripping with disdain. "You cannot just sit here because you feel like it. Some of us have earned this." Daniel finally lifted his gaze from his notebook. His eyes met hers with quiet steadiness, not defiance, not anger, just clarity. "And what exactly have you earned, Ms. Hargrove?" The question was simple, yet it struck harder than a shout. Passengers tilted forward in their seats, hanging on the moment. Victoria's lips parted, but no immediate answer came. She had expected him to retreat, not challenge her so directly with calm logic. The flight attendant tried again, this time firmer. "Ma'am, sir, please, we need to resolve this before departure." But the escalation had already taken a life of its own. Victoria laughed, a sharp sound that carried down the aisle. "Do you really think you are my equal?" she demanded. "Look around you. This is not coach. You are out of place here, and everyone can see it." Whispers rippled across the rows like waves. Some passengers exchanged knowing glances. Others shook their heads, disapproving of her arrogance but unwilling to speak. The recording phones captured every word, every gesture. Daniel inhaled slowly, placing his pen down across his notebook. When he finally spoke, his voice carried without force, as though he wanted every passenger to hear but none to feel attacked. "I am sitting in the seat assigned to me," he said evenly. "No more, no less. The ticket is mine. That is the only proof needed." A murmur of agreement buzzed through the cabin. Someone whispered, "Exactly," under their breath. Another muttered, "Why does she care so much?" But Victoria was not done. Pride would not allow her to retreat. Her cheeks flushed, and she leaned back, voice rising again. "Men like you think you can sneak into spaces you do not deserve, but you cannot fool me. You may have tricked the airline into printing that ticket, but you do not belong here, and I will not stay quiet about it." Gasps broke out this time. Passengers shifted uncomfortably, the ugliness of her words making the air feel heavier. The young woman with her phone whispered to her neighbor, "This is going to blow up online." Daniel's composure never wavered. He turned his head slightly, meeting the eyes of the flight attendant who stood frozen between them. With a small nod, he reassured her he had no intention of escalating. Then he looked back to Victoria. "No one is out of place because of how they look," he said softly. "Seats are not earned by appearances. They are assigned by fact." That line landed with quiet power. The cabin hushed for a moment, the truth pressing heavier than her accusations. Still, Victoria shook her head furiously, determined not to lose ground. "You think you sound wise, but everyone here knows what I mean," she snapped. "First class is not for people like you. It is for people who matter." Passengers exchanged uneasy glances. The arrogance in her words was louder now than her voice. Some mouths hung open, some eyes rolled. A man whispered, "She is digging her own grave." Daniel leaned back, his posture calm as ever, as though her words were smoke dissolving in the air. He did not defend himself further. He did not need to. His stillness spoke louder than any retort. And in that stillness, the open loop grew sharper. Who exactly was this man she was so determined to belittle? The answer was coming, though Victoria had no idea how devastating it would be when the truth finally landed. Victoria's laugh cut through the cabin like a blade. It was sharp, dismissive, and meant to humiliate. She leaned back in her wide leather seat, tilting her head toward Daniel as though he were an unwanted guest in her private lounge. "You sit there so calm," she mocked, her voice rising so others could hear. "But calm does not make you belong. Money does. Power does. And you have neither." Gasps scattered across the rows. A young man in the aisle seat shook his head, whispering, "She is unbelievable." Another passenger pressed record with trembling hands, the red dot glowing brighter in the dim cabin light. Victoria, however, was blind to the shifting atmosphere. She believed she was the one in control, the one setting the tone. She mistook the silence of others for agreement, not realizing it was discomfort. Daniel remained steady. He opened his notebook again, as if her insults were nothing more than background noise. He wrote a single word, paused, and then placed the pen down with quiet precision. His silence carried weight, and passengers leaned forward, curious. Victoria's eyes narrowed. "What is that notebook?" she asked sharply. "You think scribbling words makes you important?" "Please. Important men do not sit quietly. They command. They own. They lead." Her words stung the air, but before Daniel could respond, a flight attendant returned. She leaned closer to Daniel, speaking in a voice soft enough that passengers could barely catch the words. "Sir, would you like a glass of water before takeoff?" Her tone was respectful, more careful than before. She placed the napkin gently by his armrest, her movements deliberate. Passengers noticed. Whispers rippled. "Why is she treating him like that?" one murmured. "It is not how they serve the others." Victoria noticed too, and her face twisted. "Of course," she sneered. "They pity you. That is what this is. Sympathy service, nothing more." But even as she spoke, another attendant appeared briefly at the front of the cabin. She glanced toward Daniel, nodded respectfully, then whispered something to her colleague before slipping back toward the cockpit. It was small, almost unremarkable, but observant passengers caught it. One man whispered, "Wait, do they know him?" Suspense thickened. Phones angled higher, capturing every detail. The air was heavy with the feeling that something was not as it seemed. Victoria, sensing attention slipping away, raised her voice again. "Let us not pretend," she said coldly. "You may have fooled the airline, but you cannot fool me. You are nothing more than a cheap imposter, taking a seat meant for people who actually matter." Some passengers winced, others frowned. A woman 2 rows back shook her head, whispering to her husband, "She is going too far." Daniel finally lifted his gaze. His voice was steady, soft, but clear enough to carry. "Respect is not bought with tickets or titles. It is shown in how we treat others." The words lingered. For a moment, even the engines seemed quieter. But Victoria laughed again, waving her hand as if brushing away a child's remark. "How noble," she said with mock sweetness. "Spare me your wisdom. You speak like a preacher, not a man who belongs here." The whispers grew louder. Passengers were not laughing with her. They were studying Daniel now, watching closely. Every calm word he spoke, every quiet action, hinted at something deeper. Then came another clue. The lead flight attendant returned, adjusting her uniform. She bent slightly at Daniel's side and said, "Captain is aware you are on board. Sir, he sends his regards." The words were subtle, professional, yet heavy with meaning. Passengers froze. Phones zoomed in. "What did she say?" a man whispered urgently. "Captain knows him." Daniel inclined his head politely, nothing more. No pride, no announcement, just a nod. But that nod only deepened the mystery. Who was this man? Why did the captain himself acknowledge him? Victoria felt the shift. She saw the curious eyes, the recording phones, the faint change in atmosphere. Panic flickered in her chest, but pride pushed it down. "Do not be fooled," she said loudly. "This is theater. The staff are just being polite. He is no one, absolutely no one." But her voice carried less weight now. Each denial sounded more desperate, less certain. Daniel leaned back, folding, his hands quietly, his composure unshaken. He did not defend himself with anger. He did not need to. The cabin itself was becoming his witness. And with every whispered question, every recording phone, and every subtle clue from the crew, the same thought grew stronger in everyone's mind. This man was not ordinary. He was someone far greater than Victoria could imagine. The conflict was no longer between two passengers. It was between arrogance and truth. And truth, though silent for now, was about to roar. The cabin lights dimmed slightly as the plane reached cruising altitude. The steady hum of the engines filled the silence, broken only by the faint clicks of passengers' phones as they continued recording the standoff. Victoria sat upright, chin high, still trying to hold her ground. She could feel the weight of the passenger's eyes on her, and it made her fidget with the diamond bracelet around her wrist. "You can all watch," she declared smugly. "Arides. The end of the day, I know who belongs here, and who does not." But even her own voice betrayed her. Too sharp, too defensive. Daniel stayed calm, his presence quiet, yet commanding. The attendants moved carefully around him, their respect growing more obvious with each passing moment. When the lead attendant returned, she stood near Daniel's seat with her hands folded politely. "Sir," she said softly, but loud enough for the cabin to hear, "the captain has asked if you would like to greet the crew once we level off. He said it would be his honor." The words landed like thunder in the quiet cabin. Heads turned. A murmur rolled through the rows. "Honor?" someone whispered. "Why would the captain say that?" another asked. Victoria froze. Her painted smile faltered, her throat tightening as her eyes darted from the attendant to Daniel. What do you mean by that?" she demanded, her voice shaky. Daniel lifted his gaze slowly. His eyes met hers, calm yet piercing. "I mean nothing," he said, "but perhaps you should ask yourself why the captain chose those words." The whispers grew louder, a wave of speculation crashing over the cabin. Phones captured every second. Victoria's confidence slipped further, but she was desperate not to lose face. "This is ridiculous," she snapped. "You all act like this man is some kind of king. He is not. He is just another passenger." Her words stopped abruptly. A new voice broke through the cabin speaker, the captain himself. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. It is a privilege to welcome aboard Mr. Daniel Whitmore, our company's chief executive officer. We are honored by his presence on this flight. Please join me in extending our respect." The announcement ended, leaving the cabin in stunned silence. Every head turned toward Daniel, the quiet man, the one mocked, dismissed, and humiliated. Only moments before was the very man who owned the airline. Phones shook in passengers' hands as they captured the moment. A child in the front row whispered to his mother, "He is the boss of all this." Victoria's face drained of color. Her arrogance collapsed into disbelief. "No," she muttered, shaking her head. "No, that cannot be true." But the flight attendants' respectful bows, the captain's words, and the murmurs of passengers made it undeniable. Her entire performance had backfired in the worst way possible. The cabin was still, waiting for Daniel's response. He sat forward slowly, resting his elbows on his knees. His voice was low, steady, and filled with quiet authority. Respect is not given because of a seat. It is not demanded by wealth. It is not forced by titles. Respect is measured by how we treat people when we believe they are powerless. The words rang through the silence. Passengers nodded, eyes wide, some even lowering their phones in awe. Victoria trembled, her arrogance stripped away. For the first time since boarding, she had no words. She stared at Daniel, realizing the scale of her mistake. "You spent so much energy proving you belonged here," Daniel continued, his tone even, "that you forgot the simplest truth. Every human being belongs to dignity." The sentence struck harder than any insult ever could. A man 2 rows back clapped softly, almost hesitant. Then another joined. Within moments, the cabin was filled with applause, rising stronger and stronger, echoing with respect not only for Daniel's position, but for his grace. Victoria buried her face in her hands, her pride shattering beneath the sound. Daniel did not gloat. He did not raise his voice. He sat back, quiet, as though the applause was not for him, but for the lesson itself. And in that moment, the real divide in the cabin was clear. It was not about first class and economy, rich and poor, powerful and ordinary. It was about arrogance and humility, cruelty and kindness. Daniel's composure had carried him through humiliation and revealed his strength at the perfect moment. Victoria's cruelty had carried her only to shame. The big moment had come and gone, but its impact would last far beyond the flight. Because now every passenger knew they had just witnessed something unforgettable, an unmasking, a lesson, and a story that would not remain confined to this cabin. The world outside was about to hear it too. The applause faded slowly, leaving behind a silence heavier than the roar of the engines. Passengers shifted in their seats, some exchanging quiet glances, others staring out the windows, unsure what to say after what they had just witnessed. The cabin was not the same anymore. Victoria sat stiffly, her eyes fixed on the tray table in front of her. Her once proud shoulders were hunched, her hands clenched tightly together. The sparkle of her bracelet caught the light, but it no longer symbolized power. It only emphasized the hollowness of her presence. She dared not look at Daniel, dared not meet the eyes of the passengers who had seen everything. Daniel remained still. He did not move to speak again, nor did he acknowledge the whispers surrounding him. He sipped the glass of water the attendant had placed beside him, then returned the glass with a quiet nod of gratitude. His calm demeanor had not changed. He was the same man who had boarded the flight, the same man Victoria had dismissed. But, to the passengers, he was not the same anymore. They looked at him differently now, with respect that went beyond his title. What had impressed them was not the revelation of his position. It was how he had carried himself through humiliation, insult, and scorn without once losing his composure. His silence had been stronger than her shouting. His dignity had been sharper than her cruelty. A woman in the row across leaned toward her husband and whispered, "Can you imagine?" He never raised his voice, not once. Her husband nodded slowly. That is real strength. In the back of the cabin, a young man who had been recording. The entire exchange stopped for a moment, lowering his phone. He looked at Daniel with a quiet admiration. He could have destroyed her with a single sentence, he murmured, but he did not. He waited. He let the truth speak for itself. Victoria shifted in her seat, hearing fragments of the whispers. Every sound around her felt like judgment, every glance like a spotlight. She tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, pretending to adjust herself, but her face was pale. She had built her entire image on control and dominance, and in a matter of minutes, it had collapsed in front of strangers who would never forget her. Daniel did not add to her shame. He did not look at her, did not speak her name, did not acknowledge her downfall. His victory was not in her humiliation. It was in proving that dignity could stand unshaken in the face of arrogance. The flight. Attendants carried on with their duties, though even they moved with a newfound reverence in the cabin. Their eyes lingered on Daniel briefly each time they passed, not with fear, but with gratitude. They had witnessed enough flights filled with entitlement and anger. Seeing humility at this level was rare. Time moved slowly. The journey that had begun with loud voices and hostility now settled into a strange calm. Some passengers typed furiously, on their phones, sending messages, drafting posts, sharing the story before it had even ended. Others simply sat in reflection, thinking of times when they too had judged someone by appearances, when they had mistaken quiet for weakness. For Victoria, every second was torture. She sat trapped in the same seat that had once given her pride. Now it was a prison. Every breath felt like exposure, every silence like condemnation. The seat that had made her feel above others now pinned her under the weight of her own arrogance. Daniel closed his eyes briefly, not in exhaustion, but in peace. He had no need to prove himself further. The truth had spoken, and the cabin had heard. He had taught the lesson not with force, not with spectacle, but with restraint. And that was what made it unforgettable. The flight continued. The engines hummed steadily. The sky stretched endlessly beyond the windows. But inside that cabin, something had shifted permanently. Passengers would step off the plane with more than just luggage. They would carry a story, a memory of the day when arrogance was silenced by humility, when dignity outweighed power. and Victoria would step off with something else entirely, the heavy burden of shame that no wealth or jewelry could hide. Daniel, however, would leave as he had arrived, calm, unshaken, and dignified. His transformation was not in becoming something new, but in showing the world who he had been all along. The plane touched down, but the story inside had already taken flight. Before the wheels even rolled to a stop, glowing phone screens lit the cabin. Short clips were trimmed, captions written, and hashtags added. Passengers who had witnessed everything were eager to share it with the world. By the time people stepped into the terminal, the video had already begun its climb online. "Woman takes man's seat, discovers he owns the airline," one post read. Within minutes, thousands had seen it. Within hours, it was everywhere. News channels replayed the moment when Victoria tried to dismiss Daniel, followed by the captain's respectful handshake and Daniel's calm words. Headlines called it the first-class showdown. Morning talk shows debated what it meant about entitlement and hidden bias. Social media, of course, turned it into a storm of memes. One popular image showed Victoria's stunned face with the caption, "When you realize the man you insulted signs the pilot's paycheck." Another read, "She thought he was out of place in seat 2A. Turns out he owns rows 1 through 40. But beyond the jokes, a deeper conversation grew. Comment sections filled with people reflecting on their own mistakes. Some admitted they had judged strangers unfairly. Others admired Daniel's restraint, saying his silence spoke louder than any argument could have. Leadership blogs praised his reaction as a masterclass in composure. Universities even began using the clip in lectures about dignity and bias. Victoria's name surfaced too, but not kindly. She deleted her accounts, but screenshots ensured her humiliation lived on. For her, the story was a wound. For Daniel, it was a mirror held up to the world. Through it all, Daniel remained silent. No interviews, no statements, no attempt to cash in on the attention. He simply continued his work. That silence became part of the lesson. His dignity was intact, and he did not need to defend it with words. Weeks later, people still shared the clip, not as gossip, but as a reminder. It was no longer about one flight or one arrogant remark. It was about something bigger. The truth that respect is never optional, because respect is not earned by titles, wealth, or positions. It is something you owe to every human being you meet. You never know who is sitting next to you, and more importantly, you never know what your words reveal about you. That was the legacy of Row 2. Not just a viral moment, but a lesson written in silence, dignity, and respect.